All right, everyone. Hello, and my project is on women and family in the Middle Ages. So to get started, I'm going to basically give you the typical layout for a medieval family. You have the man, the woman, and the children in their family. So the men were the head of the household. They held the job that gave the family all the money, and they did accept help from the women and children. The women, their role was basically determined by their husband. Anything the husband said for the woman to do, she did. Their role was to take care of the home and produce children. Children, they didn't have the best lives during medieval times. It was filled with a lot of sickness and poor diet. A lot of women died during childbirth, and the child mortality rates were super high. Nearly 25% of the children died before they hit the age of 1, and if they did live past 1, they were put to work really early, so that was kind of dangerous. All right, so the lives of women specifically really dependent on what class they were. So women in the clergy were mostly restricted to nunnery. They were higher class women, so they had more mobility, but they were still expected to remain in their socially accepted niche and perform the duties associated with that position. A lot of nuns illuminated manuscripts. Women were known for creating books, women in the clergy, that were based off of biblical stories. The nobility, women's life in the nobility was really based on how much land they brought to the marriage. So whenever a woman married a man, the land in her name the land in her name was brought to their marriage. As merchantry grew in their class, women could actually work with the men in their lives, but this was towards the end of the Middle Ages. And women could own their own business, but only if the man who's in charge passed away. So if she worked alongside her husband and he owned a business and he passed away, then she could then be the head of the business, or same with her father or brother. Okay, serfs. These women, their lives, they worked alongside men. They were really seen as equals to men, but they worked alongside them in the medieval guild. They had more freedom and expression than women in other classes. A lot of the jobs that they held could be bakers, brewers, milkmaids, barmaids, artisans, weavers, and primarily tenant farmers who worked alongside their husbands and children in the fields. These women were property of the Lord, so he actually chose who they were going to marry, not her parents, because her parents were also property of the Lord. Okay, a life of subordinates. Women were viewed inferior to men in society. Women were denied the same social status of men, even if they were legally equal. If a woman didn't listen to a man, she could face punishment. She could have public beatings. Women's interests were controlled by their husbands, as I stated before, and husbands were actually responsible for their wives, even in legal circumstances. So a lot of documented court cases we see from the medieval times, we don't really see many women, because if they committed a crime, oftentimes their husbands were held responsible because women were their husband's responsibility. They were legal non-entities, so they could be paid less than a man for doing the same exact job, and women were possessions of men, as I stated before. Okay, how the church skewed views on women. So women basically were seen women were basically seen as an evil temptress or a virginal goddess, and these were both based on biblical stories. So evil temptress, that's based on what Eve did. If you don't know the story of Adam and Eve, Eve ate from the Garden of Eden, even though God told her not to, and that was the very first sin. They became aware of everything, and it was the downfall of men. So a lot of times they blamed women for the downfall of men, and verses in the Bible like 1 Corinthians 11:3 that states that the man is the head of the woman, and 1 Timothy 2:11-15 makes it very clear that women are subordinate to men, and Eve was the first sinner. But the birth of Jesus Christ through the Virgin Mary skewed this view of women. Women were seen as pure when this happened, and the cult of the Virgin Mary started to grow in popularity, and women began to the negative view of women was skewed. Okay. There were women who stuck out from their role as a subordinate to man. I'm not going to read all of these to you, but one of my favorites is the story of Joan of Arc. She fought as a man during the 100 Years' War. She was later burnt at stake for her crimes, but it was super brave of her, so that's always been one of my favorite stories. And one of the most important are Eleanor and Mary de Champagne of Aquitaine. That's how I'm going to say it. They were a mother and daughter kind of duo. Eleanor was one of the most powerful monarchs of the Middle Ages, man or woman, and they had a role in the development of courtly love and chivalry, which is one of the things that will, again, shape the view of women. Okay, courtly love and chivalry changed the perception of women as a whole. Women were first looked at as possessions, but were now looked at as a person to be held in high standards and protected. The chivalrous knight became the epitome for a sophisticated gentleman. The goal of men was now to protect and serve women. So that wraps up my presentation. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope you learned a little bit more about women and family during the Middle Ages. Thanks.